Donald Trump's secret act of kindness that changed a student's life forever. Imagine a single act of kindness sparking a chain of events so explosive, it would redefine two lives forever. In the heart of New York City, where skyscrapers scrape the heavens and ambition fuels every corner, a billionaire tycoon and a struggling college student collided in a way no one saw coming. What started as a lost GPS signal in Brooklyn unraveled into a saga of betrayal, redemption, and a partnership that shocked the world. Before we uncover how a borrowed phone changed everything, make sure you're part of this journey. Hit subscribe and tap the bell to witness every twist. Live. The city of New York was alive with its usual chaos. Cars honking, pedestrians rushing, and skyscrapers piercing the clouds. Among this bustling metropolis stood Donald Trump, a name synonymous with wealth, power, and controversy. To the world, he was a billionaire real estate mogul and a television star. A man who exuded confidence and commanded attention wherever he went. But behind the polished exterior lay a man burdened by misunderstandings, his straightforward nature often misinterpreted as arrogance. On this particular morning, Trump found himself in an unfamiliar part of Brooklyn. He had been driving to a business meeting when his GPS failed him, leaving him stranded in a maze of narrow streets lined with towering buildings. Frustrated but determined, he pulled over near a small cafe called Brooklyn Nook. The cafe was unassuming, nestled between two massive skyscrapers, its sign barely visible from the street. Inside, the air was warm with the scent of freshly brewed coffee, and the faint hum of conversation filled the space. At the counter stood Emily Parker, a young college student struggling to make ends meet. Her life was a balancing act between attending classes, working part-time at the cafe, and managing her mounting student debt. Emily's days were long, and her nights were even longer, spent studying under the dim light of her dorm room. Despite her hardships, she carried herself with quiet dignity, her eyes reflecting both resilience and exhaustion. As Trump entered the cafe, his presence immediately drew attention. Dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, he stood out like a peacock among pigeons. The other customers whispered among themselves, speculating about why someone of his stature would visit such a modest establishment. Emily, however, remained unfazed. She greeted him with a polite smile and asked how she could assist him. "I'm lost," Trump admitted, his tone unusually humble. "My GPS isn't working, and I need to make a quick call. Can I borrow your phone?" Emily hesitated for a moment. She knew the rules. Personal interactions with customers were discouraged, especially if they involved sharing personal belongings. But something in Trump's demeanor struck her. Beneath the confident exterior, she sensed vulnerability, a man who, despite his wealth and fame, was momentarily helpless. Without saying a word, she handed him her phone. Trump made his call quickly, his expression softening as he spoke to his assistant. When he finished, he thanked Emily and returned the phone. Before leaving, he glanced at her name tag and said, "Thank you, Emily. You've been very kind." Unbeknownst to Emily, her simple act of kindness would soon set off a chain of events that would change both their lives forever. Meanwhile, Martha, the cafe's owner, had been watching the interaction from behind the counter. A stern woman in her 50s, Martha prided herself on running a tight ship. She believed in strict rules and zero tolerance for anything that might disrupt the cafe's operations. When she saw Emily lending her phone to a customer, especially one as high-profile as Donald Trump, her face turned crimson with anger. "You," Martha barked, pointing a finger at Emily. "What do you think you're doing? Do you have any idea who that man is? You don't just hand over your phone to someone like him without permission." Emily stood her ground, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "He needed help, Martha. That's all there was to it." Martha's eyes narrowed. "Help? This isn't a charity, Emily. You work here to follow orders, not to play hero. Consider yourself fired." The words hit Emily like a punch to the gut. She had known Martha was strict, but this felt excessive. As she removed her apron and placed it on the counter, she looked Martha in the eye and said, "I don't regret helping someone in need, no matter who they are." Little did Emily know, her words had not gone unnoticed. Trump, who had been lingering near the door, had witnessed the entire exchange. His expression darkened as he watched Martha berate Emily. He pulled out his phone and began recording the scene, his fingers moving swiftly across the screen. Within minutes, he posted the video on Twitter with the caption, #JusticeForEmily. Sometimes kindness is punished instead of rewarded. Let's change that. The tweet quickly gained traction, sparking outrage and support in equal measure. For Emily, it was the beginning of a journey she could never have anticipated. A journey that would force her to confront her own prejudices and redefine her understanding of human connection. The air in Brooklyn Nook was thick with tension as Martha's harsh words echoed through the cafe. Emily stood frozen for a moment, her hands trembling slightly as she removed her apron. She had expected Martha to be strict, but this felt like a betrayal of everything she had worked for. Yet, instead of crumbling under the weight of humiliation, Emily straightened her posture and looked Martha directly in the eye. "I don't regret helping someone in need, no matter who they are," Emily said firmly, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. Her words carried a quiet defiance that surprised even herself. For years, she had been taught to follow rules without question. But in that moment, she realized there was something more important than compliance: integrity. Unbeknownst to both women, Donald Trump had paused just outside the cafe door. He had intended to leave after returning Emily's phone, but something about the exchange between her and Martha stopped him. As he watched Martha berate Emily, his jaw tightened. There was an unsettling familiarity to the scene. It reminded him of his own struggles decades ago, when he was just a young man trying to prove himself in a world that often judged him by his last name rather than his character. Trump pulled out his phone and began recording the confrontation. His movements were deliberate, capturing every word Martha spat at Emily. When Emily finally turned away, her head held high despite the tears welling up in her eyes, Trump felt a surge of admiration for her courage. He knew what it was like to face adversity, and he also knew how rare it was to see someone stand up for their principles in the face of authority. Later that evening, Trump sat in his penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park. The video of Emily's dismissal had gone viral within hours, sparking heated debates across social media platforms. Some praised Emily for her kindness and integrity, while others criticized Martha for her lack of compassion. But amidst the noise, one comment caught Trump's attention. #JusticeForEmily. Sometimes, kindness is punished instead of rewarded. It wasn't the comment itself that struck him, it was the fact that he had written it. At first glance, it seemed like a simple act of solidarity, but deep down, Trump knew there was more to it. He had seen countless stories of people being mistreated because of their circumstances, yet this particular incident resonated with him on a personal level. It wasn't just about Emily. It was about the injustice he had witnessed throughout his life, and the frustration of knowing he could do something about it. As he scrolled through the comments, Trump noticed a recurring theme: skepticism. Many users accused him of using the situation for publicity, claiming that his involvement was nothing more than a calculated move to improve his public image. While part of him wanted to dismiss the accusations, another part couldn't ignore them entirely. After all, wasn't he guilty of leveraging controversy for personal gain in the past? But this time felt different. This time it wasn't about fame or fortune, it was about proving a point. Trump remembered the countless times he had been underestimated, dismissed, or outright rejected because of preconceived notions about his wealth and privilege. He thought back to his early days in business, when banks refused to lend him money simply because he didn't come from the right background. Those experiences had shaped him into the man he was today, a fighter who refused to back down, even when the odds were stacked against him. With renewed determination, Trump decided to take matters into his own hands. He reached out to his legal team and instructed them to draft a formal complaint against Martha for wrongful termination. "Make sure it gets filed tomorrow morning," he told his lawyer over the phone, "and send a copy to every major news outlet in the city." The next day, headlines blared with news of the lawsuit. Critics were quick to pounce, accusing Trump of overstepping boundaries and exploiting Emily's misfortune for his own agenda. But to everyone's surprise, Emily herself remained silent. She hadn't spoken to Trump since the incident at the cafe, nor had she responded to any of the media inquiries flooding her inbox. It wasn't until later that evening, when Emily received an unexpected email, that she began to understand the full scope of what was happening. The subject line read, "From one underdog to another." Curious, she opened the message and found a heartfelt note from Trump himself. Dear Emily, the email began. I know we come from different worlds, but I believe we share a common struggle, the fight against prejudice. You showed incredible strength yesterday, and I want you to know that your actions inspired me. Enclosed is a check to cover your student loans. Consider it an investment in your future, not a handout. Emily stared at the screen in disbelief. Attached to the email was a digital copy of a check made out in her name, for the exact amount she owed in student debt. Tears streamed down her face as she reread the message, unsure whether to feel grateful or suspicious. Was this some elaborate PR stunt? Or was Trump genuinely trying to make amends? Before she could decide, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was a direct message from Trump on Twitter. Meet me tomorrow at noon. We need to talk. The next morning, Emily arrived at the address Trump had sent her, a sleek office building in Midtown Manhattan. Her heart raced as she stepped into the elevator, unsure of what awaited her. She had spent the entire night debating whether to meet him or not. On one hand, she was grateful for his unexpected generosity. On the other, she couldn't shake the feeling that this might be some elaborate scheme to boost his public image. When the elevator doors opened, she was greeted by a polished receptionist who led her to a conference room. Trump was already there, seated at the head of a long table, scrolling through his phone. He looked up as she entered and gestured for her to sit. Emily, he began, his tone unusually soft. I know you must have questions about why I'm doing this. Let me explain. He leaned back in his chair and stared out the window, as if gathering his thoughts. For a moment, Emily wondered if she was seeing a side of Donald Trump that few people ever did. A man unguarded, vulnerable even. When I was your age, he continued, I applied for a job at a bank. They turned me down, not because I wasn't qualified, but because they thought my family's business wasn't prestigious enough. That rejection stayed with me for years. It taught me something important. No one should be judged based on where they come from or who they are. Emily listened intently, her initial skepticism slowly giving way to curiosity. She hadn't expected him to open up like this, to reveal a piece of himself that seemed so raw and human. That's why I posted the video, Trump said, turning to face her. Not because I wanted publicity, but because I saw myself in you. I saw someone who was treated unfairly simply for trying to do the right thing. His words struck a chord with Emily, but she still couldn't fully trust his intentions. Was he genuinely trying to make amends? Or was this just another calculated move? Before she could respond, Trump slid an envelope across the table. What's this? Emily asked, picking it up cautiously. Open it, Trump urged. Inside was a check, for the exact amount she owed in student loans. Emily's hands trembled as she read the numbers. Her mind raced with conflicting emotions. Gratitude, suspicion, disbelief. She looked up at Trump, searching his face for any sign of ulterior motive. I don't want you to think this is charity, Trump said quickly, sensing her hesitation. Consider it an investment. In your future and in mine. Emily frowned. What do you mean? Trump leaned forward, his expression serious. I want you to work for me, as my personal assistant. You'll help me manage my public relations, and in return, I'll fund your education startup. Think of it as a partnership. For a moment, Emily was speechless. The offer was tempting, but something about it felt off. Was he using her to improve his image? Or was this truly an opportunity to change both their lives? Before she could answer, Trump added, and before you say no, let me show you something. He pulled out his laptop and opened a folder filled with documents. Emails, contracts, and financial statements. One document caught Emily's attention. A transfer receipt showing that Trump had already paid off her student loans anonymously. You did this without telling me? Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Trump nodded. I wanted to prove that my intentions are genuine. This isn't about PR, Emily. It's about proving that people can change, and that sometimes, a simple act of kindness can bridge the gap between two very different worlds. As Emily processed everything, she realized that her initial judgment of Trump might have been wrong. Perhaps there was more to him than the headlines suggested. But before she could fully reconcile her thoughts, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was a tweet from Martha, accusing Trump of bribing Emily to cover up a tax scandal. The accusation sent shockwaves through the media, and suddenly, Emily found herself at the center of a controversy she never asked for. Yet, instead of panicking, she felt a strange sense of clarity. Whatever Trump's true motives were, she knew one thing for certain. This was her chance to fight back against the injustices she had faced, and to prove that kindness, no matter how complicated, could still make a difference. The days following Martha's explosive tweet were a whirlwind of media attention and public scrutiny. Emily found herself at the center of a storm she had never anticipated. On one side, there were those who praised her as a symbol of integrity, a young woman standing up to injustice despite the odds. On the other side, critics painted her as a pawn in Trump's elaborate PR scheme, accusing her of selling her dignity for financial gain. For Emily, the pressure was overwhelming. She hadn't asked for any of this. All she had done was lend her phone to a stranger in need. Yet here she was, caught between two opposing narratives, neither of which felt entirely true. Trump, on the other hand, seemed unfazed by the backlash. He appeared on multiple talk shows, calmly addressing the accusations against him. "Let me be clear," he said during one interview. "I'm not doing this for publicity. I'm doing it because I believe in second chances, for myself and for others." His words resonated with some, but many remained skeptical. Even Emily wasn't sure what to believe anymore. Was he genuinely trying to make amends? Or was this just another calculated move to polish his tarnished reputation? One evening, after another long day of fielding questions from reporters, Emily received an unexpected visit from Trump. He showed up at her small apartment unannounced, carrying a folder filled with documents. "I know you're hesitant," he said as he sat down on her worn-out couch. "And I don't blame you. But I want you to see something." He opened the folder and handed her a copy of a contract. It outlined a proposal. Emily would work as his personal assistant, helping him manage his public relations efforts. In return, Trump would invest in her education startup, an idea she had been quietly developing for years. "This isn't charity," Trump emphasized. "It's a business deal. You help me and I help you. No strings attached." Emily studied the contract carefully, her mind racing with conflicting thoughts. On the surface, the offer seemed fair, even generous. But deep down, she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that accepting it might compromise her principles. Was she willing to risk being labeled a pawn in exchange for the resources to pursue her dreams? Before she could respond, Trump added, "Think about it. This isn't just about you or me. It's about proving that people can change, that even someone like me can do something meaningful without ulterior motives." His words struck a chord with Emily, but they also raised more questions. What did he mean by change? Was he referring to himself or to society's perception of him? And why did he seem so determined to prove a point to the world and perhaps to himself? As the days passed, Emily found herself torn between two choices. On one hand, she could reject Trump's offer and continue struggling to make ends meet, while pursuing her startup on her own terms. On the other hand, she could accept his proposal and use the opportunity to create real change, not just for herself, but for others like her who had been overlooked by a system that favored privilege over merit. In the end, it wasn't Trump's words that convinced her. It was a conversation she had with her younger brother, Alex. A high school dropout working odd jobs to support their family, Alex had always looked up to Emily as a role model. "Sis," he said one evening over dinner, "if this guy is willing to give you a chance, why not take it? You've always said you want to help people. Maybe this is your way of doing that." His words stayed with her long after their conversation ended. The next morning, she called Trump and agreed to meet him at his office. When she arrived, Trump greeted her with a knowing smile. "I knew you'd come around," he said. "But before we finalize anything, there's something you need to know." He handed her another document, a letter from Martha, accusing him of tax fraud and claiming that his involvement with Emily was part of a cover-up. The allegations were serious, and if proven true, could have devastating consequences for both of them. For a moment, Emily felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her. Had she made a mistake by trusting Trump? Or was this just another obstacle they would have to overcome together? Before she could voice her concerns, Trump spoke. "I'm not going to deny the accusations," he said firmly. "Instead, I'm going to prove them wrong. And I want you to be part of that journey." His determination surprised her. For the first time, she saw a glimpse of the man behind the headlines, the man who, despite his flaws, was willing to fight for what he believed in. "Okay," Emily said finally. "Let's do this." As they shook hands, neither of them realized that this decision would set off a chain of events that would test their resolve and ultimately redefine their understanding of trust, integrity, and redemption. The accusation came like a thunderclap, shattering the fragile peace that had begun to form between Trump and Emily. Martha, fueled by bitterness and a desire for revenge, released a scathing letter to the press. In it, she accused Trump of using Emily as part of a scheme to cover up a massive tax scandal. The media frenzy was immediate and relentless, with headlines screaming about corruption, manipulation, and betrayal. For Emily, the accusations felt like a personal attack. She had already faced skepticism from the public about her involvement with Trump, but this was different. This wasn't just about her, it was about trust. Had she been wrong to believe in him? Had she allowed herself to be used as a pawn in his game? Trump, however, remained calm in the face of the storm. He called an emergency press conference, inviting Emily to join him on stage. As they stood together under the harsh glare of the cameras, he addressed the room with unwavering confidence. "Let me make one thing clear," Trump began, his voice steady and commanding. "I'm not here to deny the allegations. I'm here to prove them wrong." He then unveiled a document, a copy of the contract he had signed with Emily. It detailed their agreement. Emily would assist him in managing his public relations efforts, while he would invest in her education startup. There were no hidden clauses, no secret agendas. Just a straightforward business deal. "This isn't about PR," Trump continued. "It's about proving that two people from completely different worlds can come together. Not for fame or fortune, but for mutual benefit. I don't need to buy good publicity. What I need is to show the world that even someone like me can change." His words sent ripples through the audience. Some were skeptical, dismissing his speech as another clever tactic. Others, however, began to question their assumptions. Was it possible that Trump's intentions were genuine? Or was this just another layer of his carefully crafted persona? As the press conference unfolded, Emily stepped forward to speak. Her voice trembled at first, but she quickly found her footing. "When I first met Mr. Trump," she began, "I thought he was just another billionaire trying to polish his image. But over time, I realized there was more to him than the headlines suggested." She paused, glancing at Trump before continuing. "Yes, he has flaws. We all do. But he's also someone who's willing to admit when he's wrong, and to take action to make things right. That's something I've learned from him. That change starts with honesty, even when it's uncomfortable." Her words struck a chord with many in the audience. For the first time, people began to see Trump not as a caricature of wealth and power, but as a human being capable of growth and redemption. And Emily, once dismissed as a naive young woman, emerged as a symbol of resilience and integrity. But the real turning point came later that evening, during a private conversation between Trump and Emily. They sat in his office, surrounded by the quiet hum of the city outside. "I have to admit something," Trump said, breaking the silence. "When I first reached out to you, I wasn't thinking about your startup or your dreams. I was thinking about myself, about proving a point to the world." Emily nodded, unsurprised. "I know," she replied. "But what matters isn't where we started. It's where we're going." Trump smiled, a rare moment of vulnerability crossing his face. "You're right. And for what it's worth, I'm glad I met you. You've reminded me that sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness can lead to the biggest changes." As they shook hands, both knew that their journey was far from over. The accusations against Trump would continue to linger, and the public's perception of their partnership would remain divided. But in that moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was the truth they had uncovered, not just about each other but about themselves. The talk show studio was buzzing with anticipation as the audience waited for Donald Trump and Emily Parker to take their seats. The scandal involving Martha's accusations had dominated headlines for weeks, but tonight was different. This wasn't about controversy or accusations. It was about two people from vastly different worlds coming together to share a story that transcended wealth, privilege, and prejudice. As they walked onto the stage, the contrast between them was striking. Trump, dressed in his signature tailored suit, exuded confidence and authority. Emily, in a simple yet elegant dress, carried herself with quiet dignity. Together they made an unlikely pair, but one that had captured the hearts of millions. The host greeted them warmly before diving into the first question. "Mr. Trump," he began, "there's been a lot of speculation about your involvement with Emily. Some say you're using her for publicity, while others believe you genuinely want to help. What do you have to say to that?" Trump leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Let me be honest," he said. "When I first met Emily, I'll admit my intentions weren't entirely pure. I saw an opportunity to prove a point, to show the world that even someone like me can change. But over time I realized something important. This isn't about me. It's about proving that kindness, no matter how complicated, can still make a difference." The audience erupted into applause, but it was Emily's response that truly stole the show. "When all of this started," she said, her voice steady and sincere, "I thought Mr. Trump was just another billionaire trying to polish his image. But what I've learned is that people are more than their reputations. Yes, he has flaws, big ones, but so do I. And so does everyone else." Her words resonated deeply with the audience, many of whom nodded in agreement. For the first time, people began to see Trump not as a symbol of arrogance or privilege, but as a man capable of growth and redemption. And Emily, once dismissed as naive or opportunistic, emerged as a beacon of resilience and integrity. The host pressed further. "Emily, do you ever feel like you've been used? Like this whole situation has been more about Mr. Trump's agenda than your own dreams?" Emily hesitated for a moment before responding. "At first I did," she admitted. "But then I realized something. Sometimes, life gives us opportunities in unexpected ways. Yes, this partnership started with a simple act of kindness, and maybe a little bit of self-interest on both sides. But what matters isn't where we started. It's where we're going." Trump nodded in agreement. "She's right," he said. "This isn't about PR or politics. It's about proving that two people from completely different worlds can come together. Not for fame or fortune, but for mutual benefit. I don't need to buy good publicity. What I need is to show the world that even someone like me can change." The audience erupted into applause once again. But the most powerful moment came when the host asked his final question. "Mr. Trump," he said, "looking back on everything that's happened, is there anything you regret?" For a moment Trump was silent. Then, with a rare vulnerability in his voice, he replied, "I regret not believing in kindness sooner. For years I thought success was about power and control. But what I've learned from Emily is that true success comes from connection, from being willing to admit when you're wrong and take action to make things right." As the interview drew to a close, the camera panned to Emily, who smiled softly. "Sometimes," she said, "goodness hides behind complexity. But if we're willing to look past the surface, we might find something worth fighting for." Months later, Emily's education startup had grown into a thriving nonprofit organization, providing scholarships and mentorship programs for underprivileged students across the country. Trump, meanwhile, had become an unlikely advocate for social justice, using his platform to challenge stereotypes and promote transparency. Their partnership, once dismissed as a PR stunt, had proven to be something far greater, a testament to the power of human connection. Though their worlds remained vastly different, they had found common ground in their shared belief that change was possible, even in the unlikeliest of places. As Emily stood on stage at a charity gala, accepting an award for her work, she glanced across the room at Trump. He raised his glass in a silent toast, a gesture that spoke volumes. In that moment, she realized that their journey was far from over. It was just the beginning of something bigger, a ripple effect that would continue to inspire others long after the headlines had faded. And so, their story became more than just an ending. It became a reminder that kindness, no matter how hidden or complicated, could bridge even the widest gaps, and that sometimes the smallest acts of courage could lead to the greatest transformations. And just as their alliance began to rewrite the rules, a bombshell secret emerged, threatening to obliterate everything they'd built. Will their fragile trust survive? Or will the weight of the past crush their future? The answer lies in the shadows, and you won't want to miss what happens next.